There are moments in life, quiet, devastating moments, when the very people you once trusted most reveal their true nature. Not with a loud announcement or a dramatic fall, but with a subtle shift, a withdrawal, a lie, a silence that cuts deeper than any sword. And suddenly the world you believed in no longer exists. You gave them everything, your loyalty, your kindness, your heart. And in return, they offered betrayal dressed in familiarity. That kind of betrayal, the one that comes from someone you loved or respected, is not a clean wound. It festers. It questions your worth. It makes you doubt your own judgment, and it lingers in your chest like a storm that never quite passes. You weren't just betrayed. You were dismissed, discarded, and disrespected. And the worst part? They walked away as if nothing happened, as if your pain was insignificant, as if your trust was disposable. You watched them prosper, laugh, and move on while you bled in silence, trying to make sense of a loyalty that was never reciprocated. But here's the truth that few dare to say out loud. Betrayal is not the end. It's the beginning. You see, people think they can sow deceit, plant humiliation, and water it with manipulation and escape the consequences. They assume that if they're loud enough, cruel enough, or clever enough, the universe will overlook their crimes. But reality doesn't work that way. It never has, because everything echoes. Every lie told in secret, every cruel word whispered behind your back, every time they twisted the truth to make themselves look clean while you were covered in shame. Every single one of those actions carries weight, and what they gave you in betrayal, life will return to them in the form of consequence. Not immediately, not always visibly, but inevitably. The seed of their downfall was sown the day they chose betrayal over integrity, the day they valued their ego over your trust, the day they watched you break and felt nothing. And here's the great paradox: their betrayal didn't weaken you. It woke you up. It revealed what was false. It forced you to confront the uncomfortable truth that not everyone who claims to care actually does. It was the fire that burned away your illusions, and from that fire you emerged more discerning, more grounded, and more prepared than ever to face a world that is often unjust, but never forgetful. Because while you rebuilt yourself in silence, karma began sharpening its sword in the shadows. You may not have seen it, but it was watching. The betrayal they thought they got away with became the trap they set for themselves. And the higher they climbed on lies, the harder they will fall under truth. So let me ask you this: have you truly considered that the pain they caused you wasn't just a curse, but a catalyst? That the betrayal that nearly broke you might have actually been the moment life began, separating you from the people destined to fall? What if every tear you shed was counted, not ignored? What if your silence wasn't weakness, but a pause before the storm turned? What if the universe was never punishing you, but preparing a reckoning they won't see coming? Let them mock. Let them pretend. Let them parade around in masks made of arrogance and temporary success. Because what they built on betrayal was never stable. And when it crumbles, as all false things do, don't gloat, just watch. And remember, their betrayal wasn't just a moment in your past. It was the beginning of a process that ends in their downfall. Now that the dust of your devastation has settled and you've seen the true face of those you once called your own, it's time to look deeper. To understand not just the pain they caused, but the justice that is unfolding. These next truths are not just words. They are reminders, echoes, confirmations that what they gave will return. They mocked your pain, now they cry in silence. There's a particular kind of cruelty that doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people you trusted with the softest parts of yourself. The ones you believed would never turn on you. And when the weight of the world collapsed on your shoulders, when life became too heavy, too raw, too overwhelming, you turned to them, hoping for understanding, for comfort, for even a sliver of support. But instead of compassion, they gave you mockery. Instead of holding your hand, they pointed fingers. And instead of silence that listens, they offered laughter that stabbed. They saw your pain as weakness, They saw your vulnerability as something to ridicule. When you cried, they smirked. When you broke down, they rolled their eyes. When you shared your heart, they called you dramatic. And as you stood in front of them, stripped of strength, hoping they'd be your shelter, they became the storm. Not because they were hurt themselves, but because your pain made them feel powerful, because watching you suffer gave them a false sense of superiority. And you remember it all, don't you? Not just the words they said, but the tone they used. That condescending smirk, the way they dismissed your feelings as if you were nothing more than an inconvenience. They made jokes about your silence. Gossip about your breakdowns. They talked behind your back, painting you as unstable while they pretended to be the sane ones. You weren't just hurt, you were humiliated. And the worst part? They didn't stop. They made your suffering into entertainment, and you began to question, was I really too sensitive? Was I really overreacting? But the truth is, you weren't weak, you were simply human. You were overwhelmed, you were exhausted, you were doing the best you could with what life had thrown at you. And instead of being met with empathy, you were thrown to the wolves by the very people you once protected. You would have done anything for them, listened to them in their hour of need, fought for them when they were down. But they didn't return that loyalty. They turned your pain into a performance. And you were the punchline. And now, something has shifted. The very ones who mocked your tears are now the ones crying in silence. You don't see it because they won't show it. But behind the curated photos, the loud laughter, the confident posts, they are crumbling. Life, in its mysterious rhythm, has turned the tables. What they once laughed at, they now endure in silence. The anxiety they once denied is now theirs to manage. The loneliness they never believed in is now their shadow. The heartbreak they dismissed is now the prison they wake up to every day. But they don't speak about it, because the same pride that made them mock you now makes them suffer alone. They remember how they treated you. Every moment they ignored your cries. Every time they spread your business for gossip. Every time they laughed when you were drowning. They remember. And now they are being haunted by the weight of those choices. They can't ask for help. They can't cry out for support because they fear being treated the same way they treated you. Their silence now is not noble. It is suffocating. And that silence only needed the time to heal and the wisdom to watch. And watch you did. They chose deceit. Now they live surrounded by lies. Deceit is rarely loud in its beginning. It doesn't arrive with alarms or warnings. It creeps in, subtle and quiet, wearing a mask that looks like love, like loyalty, like friendship. And that's how they entered your life. You didn't see their betrayal coming because they disguised it so well. They smiled when they lied. They hugged you while stabbing you with their silence. They told you they had your back while plotting your fall behind closed doors. It wasn't an obvious war. It was a slow poison, and by the time you tasted the bitterness, they had already begun rewriting the story. They twisted the truth not just to protect themselves, but to destroy you. They fabricated tales, shaded the facts, and flipped your reality upside down. Not because you did something wrong, but because your truth threatened the lie they wanted to live. You were honest, you were open, you were vulnerable, and they couldn't control someone who refused to play pretend. So they chose deceit. Not once, not by accident, but repeatedly, deliberately. They lied about what they did, lied about what they said, lied about how they treated you, and worse, they convinced others to believe their version of the story. You were surrounded by whispers, questioning glances, friends who suddenly became distant, family who no longer looked at you the same, and all because one person, or maybe a few, decided their lies were more important than your truth. You were painted as the villain in a story you never wrote. You were pushed into a corner, left to defend yourself against words you never spoke and actions you never took, and you questioned everything. You began to doubt your own memory. Was it really that bad? Did you misunderstand? Maybe you were the problem, but no, you weren't the problem. You were the target. They couldn't handle the truth because it exposed their insecurity. It revealed who they really were beneath the surface, and that scared them. So they built a new reality, one where they were the victim, one where you were the cause of the chaos, one where they could stand tall, not because they earned respect, but because they stole it. But what they didn't realize is this: lies are never sustainable. You can build a house on them, but you can't make it a home. Because lies demand maintenance. They require more lies to keep them alive. And over time, those lies begin to suffocate the very people who created them. And now, after all this time, the mask is slipping. They are no longer surrounded by truth. They are surrounded by a web of their own making. Every relationship they touch now carries the weight of their dishonesty. They live in fear of being exposed. Every interaction feels like walking on glass. They wonder who knows the truth, who's talking behind their back, who will be the first to turn away. They're trapped in the very illusion they created, prisoners of their own narrative, and even worse, they can't trust anyone because they know what they're capable of and they assume everyone else is just like them. They go to bed with questions they can't answer. They wake up wondering when the truth will catch up, and deep down, they know it always does. They know that no matter how loud a lie is, it can't silence reality forever. The truth may be slow, but it is steady, and it always arrives. And while they navigate a world they no longer recognize, one built on shifting sand, you walk taller, because you no longer need to prove anything. You don't need to correct their lies. Life is doing that for you. You simply need to continue walking in your truth, quietly, steadily, unapologetically, because they chose deceit, and now they are surrounded by shadows that never leave them alone. They walked away when you needed them. Now no one stays when they fall. There's something unforgettable about abandonment. Not the kind where someone moves away or drifts off slowly over time, but the kind where, in the darkest hour of your life, the people you trusted most turned their backs and left, not because they couldn't help, but because they chose not to. Because your pain was too inconvenient for their comfort. Because standing beside you would have required loyalty they never truly had. You were drowning in confusion, trying to keep yourself together when everything around you was falling apart. You didn't ask for much, just someone to be there, to listen, to say, "I see you, I believe you, I'm with you." But they gave you nothing, not even a moment of pause, not even a second glance. They walked away when you needed them the most, when your heart was cracked open and your world was unraveling. What hurts the most is not that they left, but how easily they did, how effortlessly they distanced themselves, how they justified their absence by blaming you, as if your struggles were a burden, not a cry for help, as if their silence was noble rather than cowardly. And you sat in that silence, you endured it, hoping they'd return, hoping they'd realize what you were going through, but the calls never came. The messages never arrived, and the door stayed closed. And yet, despite everything, you survived. You pieced yourself back together slowly, painfully, but with dignity. You learned to live without the very people you once thought you couldn't breathe without. You stopped waiting for their return, because one day you woke up and realized that those who could leave you at your lowest were never meant to be beside you at your highest. But life is poetic in its justice. The same people who abandoned you now find themselves in their own seasons of struggle. And suddenly they are searching for the support they never gave. They look around for the comfort they once denied, but no one stays. No one listens. No one answers their silent calls for help, not because the world is cruel, but because the seeds they planted are finally growing. They taught others how to treat them by showing how they treated you. Now, when they fall alone. And unlike you, they don't know how to carry that loneliness. They don't have the endurance you were forced to develop. They crumble under the same silence they once gave you. They taste the isolation they handed you without remorse. And in that silence, they begin to hear the echoes of their own choices. You may never see their breakdowns. You may never hear about the nights they cry into their pillows or the mornings they wake up feeling abandoned. But it's happening. Behind their confident faces and busy lives, they are unraveling. Not just because life is hard, but because the people they pushed away are no longer there to catch them. And you're no longer the same. You no longer beg for support. You've learned how to support yourself. You've grown stronger in the very space they left empty. And the love they withheld, you found it within. That's the difference. That's the justice. So let them wonder why no one comes when they call. Let them feel the weight of what they once dismissed. Because the truth is simple. They left you when you needed them. And now the world is showing them what it feels like when no one stayed. They made you feel worthless. Now they struggle with their own insecurity. There was a time when their words held too much power over you, when the way they looked at you, spoke to you, or ignored you could dictate how you felt about yourself for days. You handed them access to your self-worth because you believed they saw you clearly. You believed they cared. And in that belief, you allowed their opinions to shape how you saw yourself. That was your innocence, your loyalty, your willingness to believe the best in them. But they didn't nurture that trust. They weaponized it. They chipped away at your confidence, one cruel comment at a time. They downplayed your accomplishments, laughed at your dreams, rolled their eyes when you spoke with passion. They made you feel small in rooms where you were meant to stand tall. They dismissed your efforts, compared you to others, highlighted your flaws and silenced your strengths. And you absorbed it all, thinking maybe they were right, maybe you weren't enough, maybe you were hard to love, maybe you had to try harder just to be seen. And the pain of that runs deep, not because you didn't know your value, but because you gave them the power to define it. You allowed their coldness to dim your light. You bent yourself trying to meet their expectations, trying to please them, trying to earn a love that should have been given freely. But it was never about you. It was never about your worth. It was always about their fear of your potential, your authenticity, your inner strength. And so they needed you to feel small so they could feel in control. Now look where they are. They tried to break your spirit to inflate their own. But what they didn't realize was that confidence borrowed by demeaning someone else is temporary. It fades, and the moment you began to rise, to detach, to remember who you were beneath their criticism, that illusion shattered. And now they are left to sit with the truth they always tried to run from. Their sense of importance was built on the foundation of your pain. Now they walk through life carrying the insecurity they once projected onto you. They smile, but it doesn't reach their eyes. They speak confidently, but their words are hollow. They constantly compare themselves to others, feeling threatened by people who simply know who they are. They live in constant fear of being overlooked, irrelevant, exposed. They worry about how people perceive them, but no matter how much validation they chase, it never fills the void. You see, when you make someone else feel worthless, you create a false sense of power. But power built on manipulation eventually turns on the one who holds it. Now they struggle with self-doubt. Now they question their value when no one's watching. Now they seek praise from others to distract themselves from the voice inside that says, "You're not who you pretend to be." And that voice grows louder every day. But you found yourself again, not through their approval, but through the ashes of what they tried to burn down. You remembered that your worth isn't tied to their opinions. It never was. You are not the sum of someone's inability to love you. You are not the reflection of their insecurity. You are whole, even when they tried to convince you that you were broken. So now, while they fumble in the shadows of their own self-doubt, you rise, not just in confidence, but in peace. And the irony is undeniable. The same voice that once convinced you that you were nothing now echoes inside them, reminding them of what they tried to destroy but couldn't. They took advantage of your love. Now they chase after what they can't have. There is no deeper betrayal than being used by someone you genuinely loved. You didn't come into their life with demands or conditions. You came with a heart full of warmth, hands willing to help, and a soul that only wanted to uplift. You gave them love in its purest form, not because they earned it, but because That's who you are, and they knew it from the very beginning. They knew the kind of heart you had, a heart that forgave quickly, that stayed when others walked away, that gave more chances than anyone else ever would, and still, they used you. Not just once, not just in moments of weakness, but repeatedly, with intention. They took your kindness as an invitation to take more. Your forgiveness became their excuse to hurt you again. Your loyalty became their safety net. And over time, what started as love became something one-sided, something painful. You kept giving, hoping it would eventually be enough to change them, to make them see, to make them stay. But they were never trying to love you back. They were trying to keep you close just long enough to get what they needed. And when they were done, when your love had been drained, your energy exhausted, your joy dimmed, they left. Or worse, they stayed, only to continue pulling from you with no intention of ever pouring anything in return. They flirted with your emotions, played games with your affection, said just enough to keep you hanging on while they explored other options, chased other people, lived double lives. And still, you hoped. You waited, you tried to prove your worth to someone who had no intention of valuing it. But time changed you. Pain woke you up. You finally saw that love shouldn't feel like begging, that your worth isn't measured by how much you can endure for someone who never intended to meet you halfway. And when you finally walked away, when you chose silence instead of explaining, peace instead of pleasing, they didn't understand because they thought you'd always be there. They thought they could come and go as they pleased. They thought your love was something they could control. Now everything is different. Now they're the ones chasing, not after you, maybe not out loud, but after something they can't seem to find in anyone else. They move from one relationship to another, looking for the safety you once gave so freely. They seek validation from strangers, but it never lasts. They post the pictures, pretend they're fine, convince the world they've moved on, but inside they are starving. Starving for the love they once had but couldn't recognize. Starving for the depth, the care, the forgiveness, the warmth that you once wrapped them in like a blanket, but that love is no longer available. Not to them. Not anymore. Because you finally learned that love should not be a sacrifice of your dignity, that being needed is not the same as being valued. And while they now wander through shallow connections, haunted by the one they lost, you are healing in solitude, you are growing in silence, and you are learning what it feels like to be loved by yourself, without begging, without conditions, without pain. The love they took for granted is not theirs to reclaim. What they once used as a convenience has become the ghost that follows them everywhere. They remember how it felt, they remember how it held them, but now it's too late, because what they took advantage of was never replaceable. And now, no matter how hard they chase, they'll never find it again. They spread rumors, now they can't escape their own reputation. There is a particular type of betrayal that doesn't pierce the skin but rips through your soul. It's when someone you trusted turns your truth into a lie and your silence into a story. You didn't give them stories to use. You gave them your secrets. You gave them access. You let them into your private world because you believed they were safe, that they would protect the details of your life, not manipulate them. But instead of honoring your trust, they poisoned it. They didn't just walk away, they tried to destroy what was left behind. They spread rumors. They twisted events, they exaggerated your flaws and erased your goodness. They painted you in shades of disgrace you never deserved. Behind your back, they became storytellers, masterful in distortion, bold in deception. And worst of all, they wore innocence like a mask. They lied with such conviction that even you started to question what was true. That's the cruel part about betrayal. It doesn't just hurt, it confuses. It makes you wonder if you were ever really seen at all. And the damage they caused, it wasn't just reputational. It was emotional. The people who once stood beside you began stepping back. Whispers replaced conversation. Doubts crept in where love once lived. You walked into rooms and felt the coldness of unspoken judgment. You tried to explain, to defend, to speak your side, but your voice was buried under their louder lies. And so, you stayed quiet. Not because you were guilty, but because you were exhausted. Because chasing the truth in a room full of liars is like trying to catch the wind. They told the world who you were, and for a while the world believed them. But here's the truth about false stories. They don't age well. Lies are fragile. They crack under the weight of reality. And time, though it moves slowly, always reveals what was hidden. People begin to see the inconsistencies, the exaggerations, the drama that doesn't quite add up. And more importantly, they begin to see the person who keeps creating chaos, jumping from story to story, always the victim, never the problem. And now the storyteller is exposed. The same mouth that once fed the fire is now choking on smoke. They can't run from the image they created because it's attached to them now. People are starting to talk, not about you, but about them. Their name, once spoken with admiration, is now followed by caution, by doubt, by silence. They walk into rooms and feel the shift. They hear the same whispers they once weaponized. They look around and wonder who believes in them and who's just pretending. That's the irony of gossip. It always returns home. You don't need revenge. You don't need to correct every lie. Life has been doing that for you, quietly, precisely, and relentlessly. The people who once sided with them are beginning to see, not because you said anything, but because the truth, when left alone, always rises to the surface. Their reputation is now a shadow they can't outrun. Their charm doesn't work the way it used to. Their stories don't land the way they once did because people are catching on. The patterns are undeniable. And you've remained steady. You didn't retaliate. You didn't stoop to their level. You let your character speak louder than their chaos. You chose peace over performance. And though it hurt to be misunderstood, though it broke your heart to be misrepresented, you held your ground. And now you're being vindicated, not through vengeance, but through truth. They built their image on lies, but you built your recovery on integrity. And while they scramble to control the narrative, you no longer care who's listening, because your life is no longer about convincing people. It's about living in alignment with who you truly are. So let them deal with the storm they created. Let them face the silence that follows their own noise, because the truth they once buried is no longer buried. It's blooming, and it's revealing everything they tried so hard to hide. They thought they won, but life is not done writing the ending. In the early days of your pain, when the betrayal was still fresh and your heart had not yet learned how to protect itself, there was one thought that haunted you more than anything else. They look happy. So while you were falling apart behind closed doors, they were out in the world, smiling, celebrating, moving on without a flicker of guilt. They weren't just indifferent, they seemed to thrive after leaving you wounded. It felt like injustice had won, like cruelty had triumphed over kindness. And as they laughed and posed and posted, you sat alone with the weight of your confusion, wondering how life could be so unfair. They discarded you like an afterthought. They caused destruction and walked away without looking back. You watched them succeed while you struggled to even breathe. They gained friends while you lost your voice. They seemed to flourish while you questioned your worth. And through it all, they carried an air of arrogance, as if hurting you had elevated them, as if breaking you was proof of their power. They thought they won because to them, winning looked like freedom. It looked like being able to lie, cheat, manipulate, and still walk tall. They mistook your silence for surrender, your grief for weakness, your absence from their life as a sign of defeat. They didn't understand that you weren't destroyed, you were just beginning your quiet transformation, that you weren't gone, you were growing, that your stillness wasn't failure, it was the sacred process of healing. They didn't see the nights you cried yourself to sleep, the mornings you forced yourself out of bed with a broken spirit, the days you fought against the pull of self-doubt, trying to find meaning in the mess they left behind. They never saw those moments. And because they didn't, they assumed they had won the battle. But battles are not the whole story. And life, real life, is not a highlight reel of quick victories. It is a long, complex novel filled with unexpected plot twists, quiet comebacks, and endings that no one sees coming. And the mistake they made was declaring victory in the middle of the story, because life is not done writing. You see, while they were celebrating, life was watching. While they were mocking, karma was moving. While they were pretending to have it all, the cracks in their foundation began to grow. Because no joy built on someone else's suffering lasts. No success gained through betrayal stands strong, and no story rooted in lies ends in peace. Now, the celebration has grown quieter, the smiles are more forced, the wins are fewer, and the nights feel longer. They may not admit it, but they feel it. Something has shifted. That ease they once moved through life with, it's gone. That confidence, now punctured by anxiety. That sense of invincibility, slowly replaced with fear of being exposed, abandoned, or forgotten. And the reason is simple. They skipped ahead in the story and missed the most important chapter, the one where truth returns and resets everything. Because while they thought they broke you, you were learning to rebuild. You were learning boundaries, self-worth, strength. You were finding out that your heart, once so shattered, could still beat with purpose. You were learning that surviving betrayal does not make you weak, it makes you unbreakable. And that while they thought they won by walking away, you won by choosing not to become like them. And now the story is beginning to turn. Opportunities are finding you. Peace is becoming your new normal. Your name is being spoken in rooms where they thought you would be forgotten. You're healing in ways you never imagined possible. And the most beautiful part? You're not fueled by revenge, you're grounded in truth. You're no longer seeking to prove them wrong, because you've already proven something far greater, that you are not defined by what was done to you, you are defined by how you chose to rise in the face of it. They thought they won, but they didn't see the long game. They didn't see that temporary gain built on someone else's loss always collapse. That false strength crumbles under real pressure. That applause earned by lies always fades. And that peace, true peace, only finds those who have walked through pain without losing their soul. So let them keep pretending. Let them hold tight to the illusion of their victory. Because life remembers, and it rewards differently than the world does. It doesn't pay back on demand, it pays back with precision, slowly, quietly, powerfully. And when it does, the people who once thought they were ahead will find themselves lost, while you, the one they thought they left behind, are just getting started. Because the story isn't over, and you were never the one who lost. There comes a time when the silence speaks louder than the screams, when the tears you've shed no longer drown you, but cleanse you, and when the very betrayal that tried to break you becomes the moment you were rebuilt by something far greater than human hands. You were never weak for loving deeply. You were never foolish for trusting. What broke you wasn't your heart, it was the illusion that those you loved would love you the same. And though their betrayal may have shattered parts of you, it also awakened something far more powerful. Your discernment, your strength, your resilience. Let them carry the weight of what they did. Let life be their teacher. Let their nights be filled with the very emptiness they once left you to endure. Because justice does not come when we demand it. It comes when it is due. And it always arrives. You don't need to chase closure. You don't need to explain your side of the story. You are not here to beg for understanding from those who were never willing to listen. You are here to grow, to rise, to reclaim every part of yourself that they tried to diminish. Because while they were celebrating what they thought was your end, God was just getting started with your new beginning. What they gave you in betrayal, life will return to them in consequence, twice as hard and in ways they never expected. That is not revenge, that is order, that is balance, that is the sacred law written into the fabric of this universe. So hold your head high, not with pride, but with peace. Because the pain they caused wasn't your ending, it was your elevation. And their downfall, It began the moment they underestimated what it means to harm a soul that was always pure.